2, 1. And we welcome you into the Dog Bowl. It is Berea, Ohio. It is Browns training camp, and after a day off, after the brown and orange scrimmage, we are back here with you, recapping a Monday on a game week as the Browns get set to host the Washington Redskins in preseason game number 1. I'm Jason Gibbs. He's Nick Shook. He's Andrew Gribble, who did not wear a hat today, and tomorrow could be paying for it after the sunshine today. And he is Browns' great left tackle, Joe Thomas. Appreciate a few minutes of your time, sir. We won't keep you too long. How nice was it to be back today? You've been to training camps before, obviously. You've been a part of them for a number of years. What about today felt different than maybe the last few years that you've been back?
Well, I think the difference was when you have a guy like Baker Mayfield, you have your franchise quarterback who's standing in there taking command. That's just a different feel because I think it raises the expectations of everybody because you can always look to that quarterback position and see what he's doing and see how he's barking orders and making sure everybody's in order, and it raises your own expectations of yourself. Because you know if you step out of line, if you take the wrong step, if you go too deep on your route, if you screw up your protection, he's going to be the first one there chewing you out, and you do not want to disappoint the franchise quarterback.
Joe, I asked Joel this on Saturday, and I figured that even though you're not currently playing with this team, you still can answer it. There was some legitimate craziness, hype, excitement in 2014 when the team drafted Johnny Manziel. What is different when you come here about this team in 2019?
The hype in 2014 was extrapolating on a guy that had a good college career. What's different now is Baker Mayfield showed last year that he was the best rookie quarterback in the history of the NFL. He has done it in the NFL. We have not had that since Derek Anderson was here. When my rookie year, he won 10-6, and he went to the Pro Bowl. So there is a difference of showing it, doing it, being it, walking it in the NFL versus doing it in college. And I think Browns fans, for many years, we were dying to have a quarterback. So we wanted Johnny Manziel to work. We wanted to trick ourselves and to tell our brains that what he was doing in college was going to work at the NFL level. But it turns out it didn't work. Whereas now with Baker, we've seen it work. And now it's just a matter of taking what he did last year and just making him just a little bit better. And every year just making him a little bit better. Because he's already a franchise quarterback. Now it's just a matter of can he be the guy that leads the Browns to the Super Bowl?
There's some similarities. You mentioned the Derek Anderson 2007, your rookie year. Is there some similarities between this camp and the 2008 camp?
Not yet. So the 2008 camp was a tough camp because there was a lot of hype, but then we had a lot of injuries. So going into the season, there was all this drama, there was all these injuries. And I think what happened that season is we had a lot of players that thought, okay, we were 10-6, and all of a sudden they made their first Pro Bowl, and they had this "we've arrived" mentality, right? And I don't sense that from these guys. Like, there's a lot of players right now who became stars last year, namely the quarterback, Baker Mayfield. But I don't sense there's a sense of entitlement right now around this team and around those guys. They are working harder now than they did last year because they feel ownership of the direction that this team is headed. And I think that's a really good feeling. There's similar excitement. I think right now there's way more excitement probably than 2008, but similar excitement around the team. But I think as far as the team itself, the makeup, the players, the results, and what we've seen so far in training camp and in the family day scrimmage, totally different.
How do you think that fits with, is it good or bad with how Freddie is running this camp? Because it's more physical than your typical camp, and it seems like no matter maybe how worn down these guys might get, he's just going to keep pushing because he's trying to build that toughness and the ability to persevere in these guys.
Yeah, I've always thought that a team takes on the personality of the head coach, and Freddie's got a very direct, tough personality. That's his attitude. That's who he is, and I think that's the type of team that he wants to build, and so he's going to develop and mold his practices in his own image so that he's going to be getting 11 guys on offense, 11 on defense, and 11 on special teams that are little versions of himself, hopefully more athletic versions of himself and more in shape versions of himself, but similar mentality where he wants tough, hard-nosed guys that like football, that can trust each other, that are going to go out and give everything they got every single play.
Is there a coach that Freddie reminds you of that you had during your time here, or even maybe at Wisconsin?
That's interesting. You try to play the comparison game, and it is always tough, but Freddie has the background with Bill Parcells, Romeo Crennel, Eric Mangini, George Warhop when he was my offensive line coach here. Those are all guys that had worked for Parcells directly or had worked for people that were Parcells' disciples, like Bill Belichick with Eric Mangini. And so I would say all those guys that kind of come from the Parcells tree, they're all different. They're all their own people, but they all believe in the same type of tough, hard-nosed, disciplined football players, football teams that are accountable, that are consistent. And I think that's what you're seeing from Freddie early on in camp already. He's not going to tolerate any mental mistakes. He's not going to tolerate penalties. Those are the things that are the same things that built the Bill Parcells, Bill Belichick dynasties, right? I'm going to be tough. I'm going to be disciplined. We're not going to make mental mistakes. We're not going to have penalties. We're going to eliminate the things that we can control. And as a tough, disciplined football team, we're probably going to win more games than we lose.
So from a player's perspective, we're kind of at that point now, day 10, where you don't have the reward of that preseason game right in front of you. It's kind of close. It's on Thursday, but it's not really there yet. So it would be considered the dog days of camp. What was that like for you? How did you motivate yourself and keep yourself, in mental tip-top shape in order to go out and execute when maybe you weren't feeling that great?
For me, it was just take training camp one day at a time, right? Once you get into the flow of the preseason games, it's a lot easier because now you're traveling. You're staying in a different hotel. You're going to eat some different food. You're going to go hit a different opponent with a different helmet on. So that gets a lot easier once you get to that point. But the dog days truly are those days that you're hitting your own teammates for 2, 3, 4 weeks in a row before you hit another opponent. And for me, the way I kind of got through it was I tightened my focus. I narrowed my focus down to each day I wanted to get better at one thing. And I would take my notebook out, and at the top of my notebook every day I would write down what that one thing is I wanted to work on and then how I was going to work on that. And I would go out and I would try to accomplish that in practice. So you're setting like little goals throughout the day so that at the end of the day you can go back and when you're reviewing film, you're looking, okay, did I accomplish my one goal for the day? If yes, great. Now the next day it's something new. If no, why didn't I do that? Why was my method? Why did it fail? And how do I make it better, find a better process to solve that issue so I can accomplish the goal? So each day is its own game, per se, where you're trying to compete against yourself to make yourself better so that at the end of camp, if you've had 21 practices, you've gotten better at 21, hopefully different things, and you're a much better player at the end of training camp. And so you're trying to play these little mind games throughout so that when you wake up and you look up and all of a sudden, oh, we've got a preseason game tomorrow against the Washington Redskins. It's like, okay, great. Now I'm in game plan mode. I can get through the rest of camp because the drudgery is kind of over for the most part.
We were talking about this last week, and it was kind of a popular storyline. It was Myles Garrett versus Greg Robinson at left tackle. And it was one of those things where you're wondering, is Myles Garrett really this good, or is Greg Robinson struggling? If you're a guy like Greg and you're getting better, how do you avoid the whole mental side of it that can be taxing going against Myles Garrett?
It's a real challenge, and it can be very frustrating because especially early on in camp, the defense usually gets the better of the offense because defensive schemes are much easier to comprehend and get everybody on the same page because by and large, and this is offensive to defensive people, I understand, it is see ball, get ball on defense. There's some running around and some crossing and some stunts and blitzes and stuff. But for the most part, once the ball is snapped, you take your 2 or 3 steps and you find the football. Whereas offensive football is so much more detailed and the coordination and the cooperation between all 11 people is so much greater. The detail level is so much greater. It takes a long time to make sure everybody's on the same page. And so it is frustrating when you've got a guy, especially as good as Myles, that's beating you consistently because you almost can get this feeling that I can't work on my technique because even when I'm trying to work on it and get better, I'm getting beat. So now you're just holding on to your ass, trying not to get beat, right? And so it's almost good sometimes when you do start doing some of the 1s versus 2s stuff as you're getting closer to that preseason game or you're going against, like next week against Indy, you're getting an opportunity to rep against somebody who's not as good as Myles. So now I can kind of slow things down and start maybe focusing on my own technique where I don't have to worry as much about getting beaten. I'm just sort of holding on to my ass. But one thing I will say is when you are going against a guy like Miles every day, I went against him his rookie year, my last season during training camp, and that was all I could handle. So I can't imagine what he's like now 3 years in. But for me, that just heightens the importance of the walkthroughs, because the walkthrough is now your opportunity to focus on doing my technique and my assignment perfect without the fear of getting beat. All right, it's one-on-one. I'm out there. The number one most important thing is don't get beat. Then you want to work on your technique, right? Now I'm out there and Nick Chubb's running the football or Baker Mayfield's throwing it. I can't let my man beat me. That's the most important thing, right? You slow things down in that walkthrough period. Now the most important thing is improving that technique, making sure my calls and my assignment is dialed in. And so I think for a guy like Greg, who might be having a hard time keeping up with Miles in training camp, those walkthroughs are even more important.
So I think conventional thought would say, well, if you go against a guy who's that good, naturally you're going to improve yourself. But I think on the flip side, is it possible for you to develop bad habits because you're spending a lot of time, like you said, holding onto your ass?
Yeah, I think the two things you got to worry out for is, like you mentioned, you got to worry that your technique goes to crap because you are just hanging on to your butt and you're trying to do anything you can. You're by hook or by crook. George Warhop used to say, whatever it takes, get your job done and get that guy blocked. And so you got to have a coach that's savvy enough to understand, like, okay, remind him, hey, it's still about the technique. You need to still slow things down. We don't want you to lose any confidence that you have because, look, Myles Garrett is one of the best that is playing this game right now, and he might go down as one of the best defensive ends in history when things are all said and done. So don't get discouraged. So that's when the coach has got to play psychologist a little bit and be your biggest advocate on your behalf. And I think that's why a coach has to be a teacher and understand socially with people about how to approach them and how they learn best. And sometimes a kick in the ass is the best thing for a player, but sometimes they need the arm around the shoulder and help give them a little bit perspective on, yeah, you lost that rep, but this is why it's okay.
From a former player's perspective, when is the best time for an offensive line competition to end?
January 1st after the season's over. Yeah. Really, having a competition is great because competition always brings out the best in everybody. It's the old saying. But the problem is when you're doing it during training camp, you're losing the ability to get that nonverbal communication down that as an offensive line you need. And look, when I play next to Joel or John Greco or any other offensive guard or Nick Shook or Jason Gibbs, each guy is going to be a little bit different. And so getting that sense of familiarity on how you're going to block things, where my shoulders are going to be, where are my pads, where are my footwork, that takes time. That takes time working together to work through all that stuff. And so every time you're working with somebody that's not going to be the guy that's out there on Sundays, you're losing that opportunity. Your opportunity cost of having that competition is now I don't have the 5 guys working together that are going to be out there on Sunday. So you want to wrap that up as quickly as possible. So when you hear that the right guard competition is ongoing, you know that there's not a clear winner right now, because if there was a guy that was clearly head and shoulders above everybody, they already would have named him the starter because they want those guys working together as soon as they possibly can.
So going deeper into the depth chart, even though there isn't a depth chart right now, if you think about it, we have a rookie who's been playing 4 positions right now, and Drew Forbes, who was a tackle in college, who's pretty clearly not a tackle in the NFL, but he's getting tackle reps at both sides, and he's also getting guard reps at both sides, and sometimes he'll go one play at left tackle, and the next play he's playing right guard, and he's playing next to different people. Those people are also cycling out. So can you kind of talk about the difficulties of that? You know, you were pretty much a starter from day one or close to it, so maybe you didn't experience that as much, but I mean, that's got to be pretty tough for a guy.
I was really fortunate for my entire career going back to college that I came in as a left tackle, and I never took any reps at anything but left tackle in college or in the pros, except for in the Pro Bowl when they stuck me out at right tackle because Jonathan Ogden and the other old guys were like, no, we ain't paying.
Yeah, D tackle though, right?
Yeah, I played defensive line in college a little bit, but also left tackle. But I was really lucky, and so I think that accelerated my growth because I could focus on one thing. So it is very challenging because as an offensive lineman, football is a game of a million little things, but offensive line is a game of 10 million little things and techniques and details that you have to put together on every play. And You can have one play and it could be blocked 100 different ways as an offensive lineman, and you have to know the technique that changes based on the defense and the approach and the front that you're getting and who's running the football, and all those different factors come into play. And so the more positions you play, you're just multiplying. If there's 10 million little things you have to learn to be perfect at left tackle, and there's 10 million things to be perfect at right guard, if you're doing both, now you're trying to learn 20 million things in the same amount of time. So you're getting half the amount of time to learn the same amount of things. Or now if you've got 3 positions, you're learning 3 times as much in the same amount of time. So it adds a layer of difficulty, especially for somebody that might be new to those positions. But what the coaches and the scouts are going to be looking for is they're going to say, we understand maybe he's not as polished at this position as somebody else, but they can see the development and the progress that he's making. How quickly is he learning? Can he bend his ankles, knees, and hips the way he needs to? How does he move? How quickly does he take up the coaching? Is he remembering the plays? Those are all the things that are going to play into it, because we know he's probably not competing for a starting spot right now.
Yeah.
So they're looking down the line. What type of potential does he have where he could maybe develop into a starter, or at least 2, 3, 4 years down the line, he's a really solid first backup that comes in the game on the offensive line.
So kind of in that same vein, Austin Corbett has been seeing some reps at both guard and center, and I saw on Saturday, after watching him every day, he looks like he's getting really comfortable at center. Mm-hmm. What's the value in that and getting him to play both positions? Obviously, center and guard are a little bit more similar than a tackle to a center or something like that. You're not really going to see that, but what's the value in that?
If you're going to be a really good starter as a guard or tackle in the NFL, it doesn't matter if you can play the other inside 3 positions. But if you're going to be a backup in the NFL, or even a borderline starter, as an inside 3 position player, you have to be able to play all 3, because on the game day roster, they're only keeping 7 offensive linemen that are active. There's going to be 1 backup tackle and there's 1 backup guard center. So if Austin's going to be the backup this year, he's the first guy that goes in the game. If the center goes down, he's going to have to be able to go in and be the starting center. If the left guard goes down, he's got to go in and know all the left guard stuff. Same thing with the right guard. So it'll be vital for him. If he's not named the starter at right guard, he'll probably be the first backup that comes in on the inside 3. He has got to be able to snap the football confidently, because if something happens to your center position, like 2013-14, Alex Mack breaks his leg. Who would have thought? Another NFL Iron Man on our offensive line, the Pro Bowl center, breaks his leg. We lost him for the whole year. John Greco, who's a guard, he's not a center. He was never snapping the football a day in his life till shortly before that. He is now your starting center, so he better be damn good, because that center position is really important. And so for Austin, I think this really helps his career to be able to be comfortable at that center position, because you want to be a guard in the NFL, especially if you're not a Pro Bowl. If you're not Kevin Zeitler or Joe Bitonio, Pro Bowl guard, you have to be able to snap the football and be confident as a center.
Now that you're out of the league, where are you at with the importance of these guys playing in the preseason? And I'm sure, I don't know if this thought has evolved as your career went through.
To me, the preseason's, it's kind of like a practice. You want to walk that fine line between getting enough reps, enough practices for your players that they're ready, but without taking unnecessary risk. But risk is a funny thing, because risk is different to everybody. I may be willing to jump out of an airplane with a parachute, but that might be too much risk for Jason Gibbs to take. So every coach is going to be different, and they're looking at all their different assets and finding out, how much does this guy need, and can I risk playing Baker without playing all the starting offensive linemen? A lot of coaches don't think so. And so for me, I'm still kind of a traditionalist with my approach. If I was the head coach to preseason, I would say, all right, the first preseason game, I want all my guys to play for a quarter, my starters. And then from there, we'll kind of roll our way through. The second game, I want all my starters to play the first 2 quarters. Because at some point, you're going to have to put those guys out there, and they're going to have to play football. They're going to tackle. They're going to block. It's a physical game. You can't avoid that. And do you want the first time those guys are having physical reps to be the first game of the season? I don't think so. Because I think the first game of the season is not a time to figure things out and to feel your way through it. The first game of the preseason is when you should sort of get some of the rust off, I think. Then the second game, get a little more rust off. Third game, let's go.
Dress rehearsal.
It's the dress rehearsal. And then the fourth game, If you don't want to play anybody in the fourth game, I'm okay with that. If you want guys to play for a quarter, I'm okay with that too. Whatever you want to do, that's all good. But I do think you want to get a little of that rust off in a live scenario in preseason, and then when you're going that first regular season game against Tennessee, you're ready to roll, and you don't have any of that rust left.
How do you feel about practicing against other teams and then playing them in the preseason?
That's a little different scenario because when you're practicing against another team, I only did it once. We went up to Buffalo and we played against the Bills in 2016. Gribble, he's a lot
15,
smarter.
15.
He's a lot smarter with the memory on that stuff.
Took the train.
We took the train,
Yes,
which was
we
kind of
did.
cool. I actually have some fond memories from that trip because it was different, right?
Yeah.
You do all these training camps in your life and they're all kind of the same, but you remember the different stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So I can't say I love practicing against another team because there is a lot more pressure. But you don't want to get beat by somebody else. Just like your offensive line coach is going to be talking trash with their defensive line coach, who I'm sure they know each other, if his guy wins a rep. So there's a lot more competition. There's a lot more banging. It's a lot more physical typically. Because of that, a lot of times then maybe you don't need the preseason game as much at the end of the week because you're kind of getting better reps during the week against those guys. But I still think there is something to, especially for the young guys, going through the motions of getting to the stadium, going through warm-ups, getting yourself lathered up and feeling what those emotions are like as they get ramped up for a game, going out under the stadium, under the lights with those fans in there, and just start making that part of your routine. And so that the first time you do all that is not the first Sunday in September. I just think getting in that habit as much as you can, even if you just go out and get the first couple drives, I do think there is more to be gained than the risk taking of playing a few snaps.
Biggest challenge facing you now as an NFL Network analyst on Thursday night?
Great question. The biggest challenge is being a Browns fan. I follow the Browns. I love the Browns. I know a lot about the Browns. But when you're doing Thursday Night Football, you literally have a different team every single week. Yeah. There is no repeats because every team only plays one Thursday game. So the research that you have to do and the film study and the work that goes in is brand new every single week. When I'm doing Cleveland Browns Daily or I'm doing stuff with the Browns, it just builds on itself, and the themes are consistent throughout the season. You know the players, you know the stars, you know sort of how the offense is doing, how the defense is doing, how the players are performing. And so you don't have to relearn everything about the team every single week, whereas when you're doing Thursday Night Football, it's everything new every single week.
Joe, I got one last one.
Taki
has been a guy Taki's been a guy that's gotten under the skin of some offensive players. I'm just wondering if going back in your time the last 10 years, was there a player that kind of got under the skin of your side of the ball, and then does that go away once the season starts and you guys are actually going up against different teams?
Yeah. So the guys that get under your skin from an offensive standpoint are usually the guys that haven't proven themselves yet, but are going a little bit out of control, maybe a little bit wild, where you think that maybe they are hitting your running back a little too hard after the whistle. They're giving that extra push, that shove, and they haven't earned it yet, right? So Robert Smith was a longtime defensive lineman in the league, and if anybody touched him 1/2 second after the whistle, he was throwing down and having a fight immediately, except me and him. We were cool. Like, if you had earned your pelts on that wall, he was cool. But if you were a guy that hasn't had a lot of snaps in the NFL, you were as good as dead to him. And I remember, the name, Titus Brown. Not a guy that probably a lot of Browns fans remember, but he terrorized the offense during training camp because he had some good moments, and he would jump the snap, and he would do a lot of things that get under your skin, like hitting your running backs late. He would give the extra shove in your back after the play was over. He would maybe, when you were in the thud period, which just means wrap up, it means wrap up and don't tackle. He would maybe wrap up and just act like he fell to the ground and tackle your running backs. And so he would definitely get under your skin. But once you do that as a player, then you either go one way or the other. Usually you go and you become a solid starter and sort of a really good player in the NFL, and it's like, wow, that guy's a wild man. He plays the right way. Or you're the guy that falls off the map and you never hear from him again.
Yeah.
So hopefully he becomes that household
Amen
name,
to that.
big-time starter.
Joe, we appreciate the time, man.
Thanks
you
a lot,
so
man.
much.
Always good being on with you guys.
And best wishes here with the Thursday night football career.
Thank you.
Is it nice being home with the fam and the kids?
Yes.
How's Daddy Daycare going?
Yeah, Daddy Daycare is crazy. I told somebody this morning when we got out to Cleveland on Saturday, we had a bunch of stuff going on. So Sunday morning, we took the kids to brunch. And I like to eat still. I know sometimes it doesn't look like it, but I was really looking forward to a good brunch. We were in Tremont. We were going on to Fahrenheit. They've got a great Sunday brunch. Well, Fahrenheit was closed for a private party, which was sad. So we walked down the street to a different place, and we sat down. And within the first 10 minutes, 3 out of my 4 kids have all spilled an entire glass of water on the floor. Then my second daughter had dropped 3 different forks on the ground, and all of her scrambled eggs ended up on the floor. My son looked like a coal miner because the waitress had given him chalk, and there was a chalkboard behind us that he could draw on, but he didn't realize that like chalk goes everywhere. So he had like black chalk all over half of his face, covering both his hands and his arms. It was basically an enormous disaster, and I was dripping sweat because I was so stressed out at the end of that brunch that I canceled dinner. I'm like, that's it. We're not eating dinner. I'm going to like stop at McDonald's and throw hamburgers at you guys on the way home because I can't stand one more minute in the restaurant with you animals.
Gribble canceled family vacations. Gribble canceled summer
vacations.
vacations.
No, it's just
I canceling summer if you guys don't shut up in the back.
No, vacations when the kids are 3 and 1. I mean, they're not enjoying.
No, the key is
And you're not
stapling.
enjoying
no
it.
one's having
Nobody's
fun.
having fun.
No one's enjoying
It's
it.
obligatory drudgery.
Well, and then I listened to like a Jim Gaffigan bit where he's like, we spend all these hard months in the Midwest just suffering through winter, and then the summer comes and we all leave.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
There's no, so I'm fully bought in. When there's maybe like 6, maybe I'll.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll splurge.
Jim Gaffigan's great. He's got like 5 kids or 6 kids, and he's so funny about it and so real. I love listening to him. He speaks right to me, my family.
Thank you to Joe Thomas. Thank you to Andrew Gribble and Nick Shook. I'm Jason Gibbs. Make sure you download this podcast wherever you get your podcasts or at clevelandbrowns.com. This has been the best podcast available.